And therefore, if I express the capacity of the downstream link in packets per round trip time, I know that if I send, if my congestion window is larger than k packets, what does that mean? That means I'm sending more than k packets per round trip time, and therefore the excess packets are going to end up in the buffer. So the router buffer will accumulate packets if more than k are sent per round trip time. So in other words, I can sort of represent that like this. Remember, I can quantize time by round trip time. So here's time. And yes.
If we send more than k per round trip time, we're never going to get the acknowledgements for that, right?
They'll go into the buffer. They'll go into the buffer. So
the buffer before it's sent.
Yeah. If you later back off, then eventually those packets will be sent to acknowledgements.
So we're saying that it's acknowledged after, or the receiver window size is that. So what's the receiver window size, k as well?
Receiver window size.
Because that's the one that's going to affect how many packets we're going to wait until we acknowledge, right?
Right.
So would it be related to the capacity of the? Will we have a case that we're always going to use everything?
We have a case that also with everything.
Let's just say if the capacity, like, is it only it waits for k packets to acknowledge, or is there also a timer in the receiver that if that expires, it will acknowledge as well? I'm asking, I lost myself.
I mean, there is a timeout in that. That's the TCP timeout. It's the time that will expire before you can receive the packets. So, in other words, what's going to happen? So we'll have if we put k here, then here I'm quantizing time by the round trip times. So as long as we stay below this line, if I'm sending, let's say I started slow start, 1 packet, 2 packets, 4 packets, and so on. So I'm in slow starts, I'm exponentially increasing the number of packets. As long as I stay below this line, I'm not accumulating packets in the buffer.
So that K is like the data rate at which the downstream processes packets.
Precisely. So you're right. If I go above this line, for one thing, I'm going to start accumulating packets in the buffer. For another thing, my acts aren't going to come back quickly enough. So that's a problem. But what I'm going to do
if your acts aren't coming back quickly enough, they're timing out, and then you're sending those packets anyway.
correct. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at indirect TCP, where the intermediate station is for one thing putting these in its buffer and acknowledging them directly. Okay, so it doesn't matter if these guys are in the buffer. It doesn't matter because they've already been acknowledged.
You're saying they go into the buffer of the sender. You can't put them on the link at all.
No. This is so perhaps I should have drawn this. This is the scenario I have in mind. Too hot network. So I send 1, 2, 4, 8. Let's say k equals 5. Okay. So if I send 1, that gets through. So the capacity of this link is, let's say, k packet, k segments per round trip time. All right. So if I send 1, that's fine. So if k is 5, if I send 1, that's fine. Then I get the acknowledgement. If I send 2, that's fine. If I send 4, that's fine. If I send 8, then 5 get through here and 3 stick in the buffer. Okay? Okay, so next thing I'm going to say is that we are using indirect TCP. So in indirect TCP, the router separates the wired link from the wireless link. So what happens in that case? The router will act as those packets arrive here. So here's the router. This is wireless, and this is wired. So as soon as, in other words, these 8 packets arrive at the router, remember what we said before about indirect TCP, as long as there's space in the buffer, those packets will be acknowledged immediately. Now remember why we do this. We do indirect TCP to isolate the original sender, the corresponding node, from any noise that's happening on the wireless link. So this is wireless, and this is wired. So in other words, packets are acknowledged by the router as they arrive, and are then forwarded using the custom protocol.
Wouldn't that be a problem for some applications? Like if the original sender is expecting that once it's acknowledged, something is going to start happening on the receiving node, and he gets an acknowledgement from the router in between.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that confuse it?
That's a good one. So we talked about this last week. The biggest problem with indirect TCP is that these packets are acknowledged even though the final destination hasn't received them. So we didn't actually talk about that example last week. That's like a real-time, like an actuator kind of example. So you'd be depending on, so for instance, this guy would be saying, there's a fire, so turn on the sprinkler. And the router would be saying, acknowledge, I got that message. The sprinkler's on now, and meanwhile this link is down, so that's not happening. So for like something super mission critical like that, it's not clear that you'd use TCP/IP or a wireless link for that matter.
Would that be reliable though, if you're not using TCP/IP?
So let's. What's the example we talked about last time? That where the fact that the act is not received causes a problem.
The mobile node undergoing handover those packets that were sent, and then get handed over to the new smart agent.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So if all these packets are acknowledged, and suddenly this guy's not connected to the router anymore, and meanwhile the router's got all these packets in his buffer that have already been acknowledged, the sender thinks this guy got all those packets, so those packets can never be resent. So in indirect TCP, we talked about this last time, handover is a huge problem, but you can go back and review that in your notes. Okay.